Hey y'all, so this is another episode of Poly Side Eye featuring JC Tiger fan Jared. There you
Hello.
go. We are completely live right now. Um, yeah, so much has been going on. So much. Like at first, I thought, before yesterday, with there's like the bang bang, that. And I was like, we should talk about that. But then yesterday, I was kind of surprised. I did hear that Biden was dropping out that weekend, but I didn't think he was actually going. I knew it was going to actually happen. So I know a lot of people have questions for you, including me, because everyone was just wondering, like, what does Jared have to say about this? This was anticipated, and yes, we can see all of your comments. Hello, Bree RN. Hello, Camilla Will 03 OA. This is my first live, but I love you, Chris. I have to come support from Pop Rose. Thank you. This is basically like a political Pop Rose.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
with it. Yeah.
Why don't you just reintroduce yourself?
Okay, so for everyone who doesn't know, my name is Jared. I am an assistant professor in political science at Temple. But Chris and I have been doing our own kind of like a spin-off show that we call Poly Side Eye, where I try to break down maybe things that seem complicated that people could understand if they were discussed in like regular people terms. So yeah, we just try to simplify politics for y'all and do it with a little bit of pop culture too.
Yes, and I also want to congratulate you on your article in the Wired, y'all. It's called "The Inevitability of Big Tech Backing Trump." It was a really good read. I love how you dragged Elon Musk.
I will always do that any chance I get. Also, I'm gagged because you said the Wired, you put the in front of it like old people do. So
Oh,
it's just Wired, not the Wire. But I appreciate the shout
the
out.
shade, not like old people do. Okay,
And the in front of everything.
well, he's in Wired magazine.
Wired magazine, yeah.
Okay, and also the link to the article is in the description below. I put it there in case you want to read it. But yes, so Biden dropped out of the race yesterday. I was very angry at first because this all started from the debate. That like all of this started from the debate, and it just felt like the media was just full of the propaganda. I'm just like, do we not realize that his running mate is a racist? Take out the C and add a P. We saw that he ran the country. Like, what are people not getting? Like, he's the one that's not fit to lead. So I was just like, how did we get here? But then later in the day, I was like, okay, well, it seems like the party's uniting. Now the narrative is he's selfless. He's a political leader and stuff like that. Yeah. So let me just read some comments first before I ask you to comment on all of that.
Sure.
Basically, this is like the consensus around people. Like, can't lie, I'm super worried about the outcome in November. I am terrified, which is it's just crazy that he has a shot. Yeah, let me see. Jared got the curls popping.
Oh yeah, yeah. Y'all see, I got a new wig. I was this close. I mean, y'all, people probably can relate to this. Like, so I've been growing my hair out since like last summer. And you get to this point where you're like, it's not really giving what you thought it was supposed to have gave, and you're like, I was like this close to doing the big chop. And then I don't know, I just like one day, like things just kind of fell into place, and I'm like, oh, kind of like this. So if you're growing your hair out, stick with it. You can get through the dark ages. I've been there. So thank you.
This is the only YouTube discussion on this subject I think I can stomach. Worked in New York Dem politics for many years. They're saying he did poorly in the debate. I still don't think that he did that poorly to the point where he had to drop out. But anywho, what do you think of all this? What did you think when you read that he was dropping out yesterday?
So I actually wasn't that surprised by it, only because a couple weeks ago, I think it was, that I read that some really wealthy donors were threatening to withhold up to like $95 million from his campaign if he didn't step aside. So you know me, I study political economy, so I always filter most of my politics and most of pretty much everything through the lens of where the money reside, because 9 times out of 10, like if you follow the money, the answer is there. And so like when I saw that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, was going to be was going to lose out on $100 billion, that probably would have gone to Trump. In if this didn't happen, I knew that it was only a matter of time. And so I think really what the last few weeks were how do you do this in a way that doesn't seem like the party is like attacking Biden? And I don't necessarily think they did like the best job at doing that. But you could see that they were essentially trying to get their ducks in a row and do this in a way that was tasteful. I actually thought this would have happened on Friday or on a Friday, because Fridays are usually the slowest news days. So because people are usually like, it's the end of the week, people are usually out. And so if there's a big like bombshell story, the rule of thumb is kind of you drop it on Friday because nobody's going to be checking their phones really on the weekends. But they waited and announced it on yesterday, which I'm like, you would do that on a Sunday. So not everybody's getting their week or starting their week talking about this. So I wasn't surprised that he stepped down. I was a little surprised by the timing of it. But again, when the money came up, I was like, yeah, it's only a matter of time.
Right. So the first statement, I was just like, what the hell we gonna do now? But then afterward, he endorsed Kamala. And I was like, okay, well, I guess she is going to be that person. I don't know if like Republicans can contest that. That's what my biggest question was. Like, can they
being the nominee?
What happened?
Contest her being the nominee?
Yeah, like can they do anything legally?
So it's tricky because we really don't have much precedent. So like the law, like the way we talk about the law, we make it seem like it's just something that sprouts out of the ground. But like the law is political. So like people will bend and twist and find whatever justification they need to uphold or to find something unconstitutional if it doesn't like accord with their own political position. So like I don't think we should like be like, oh, with certainty like there's no legal issues, because we never know, especially with this crazy right-wing judiciary that we have. But that being said, like from my understanding, most states, in terms of like getting onto the ballot for the fall election, for the general election in November, just requires some type of submission from the major parties. So whoever the major parties nominate to lead their parties, then that's who it's going to be. Now, the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing conservative think tank, has already said that they're going to start waging lawsuits against this. But my impression is less about they believing that they'll win, but more so they want to essentially like distract Democrats from like campaigning and focus more of their resources on like this legal battle. Now you could say that, well, the argument they're making, they're like, well, people voted for Biden in the primaries, and so like you can't just like pick somebody else. But to me, that doesn't really hold up, because like all kind of things can happen. People can, pass away. I mean, all kind. So you can't just go based on like, oh, whoever the people voted for has to be on the ballot in the fall, because lives. But I do think that one thing that people don't remember or don't think about is like when you vote in Democratic primaries or Republican primaries, any of these party primaries, you're not actually voting for the candidates. You're just voting for delegates to represent you at the convention. And in theory, the delegates can vote for whoever the hell they want. They don't have to vote. So each state has a certain number of delegates. And like typically, whoever wins those state primaries, the delegates vote on behalf of the general public or whoever participated in those primaries. But they don't have to do that. And people forget that up until 1972, there was no Democratic involvement in the party nominating process. It was literally in a smoke-filled room. You'd have like the party heads and like maybe a few people from like big oil, Standard Oil and like the banks or something would come in and essentially would handpick whoever they wanted, whoever was going to push through their own like political project. It wasn't until after the civil rights movement and such in the 60s that the parties were like, oh, I guess we kind of have to like give people a say in this if we want to pretend that we actually have a democracy. So I just want to give it a little bit of that history.
Yeah, and I knew it really depend on if she get the right amount of delegates. But I guess the first thing on people's mind when, he said, I'm going to be behind Kamala is, are people going to vote for Kamala? Like, is she going to win against Trump? And a lot of people have been just saying like, okay, well, I think it would be weird if they just skipped over her. And like, who would it be? And I've just been hearing the same name, Gavin Newsom. And I don't think, I remember you said like 2 California people on the tickets wouldn't work.
I don't think I said that. I was just saying I didn't think it was going to be Gavin Newsom because I don't feel like anybody really wants this because like you're really walking into an impossible situation. So if it isn't Kamala, again, I'm not in the DNC. I don't know what they're saying behind closed doors. So at this point, it's all conjecture. But like you have 4.5 months essentially to like cobble together a campaign and like do all of his legwork. You already, but after the last set of polls that I saw had Biden down in literally every single swing state. And some almost by double digits. Like North Carolina, I think the average was like +7 in favor of Trump. So like you're pretty much coming into it with a bad hand. So I'm like, why would you want to do that? Also, Gavin Newsom already endorsed Kamala, so like he's not gonna renege on that. And he's also an institutionalist. And what I mean by that is like Gavin Newsom is first and foremost a Democrat, and he wants to stay in the good, the good side of like the Democratic leadership council, essentially. So in the eyes of Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and like all these other people. And so I don't think he would do that. At this point, I don't think the party wants to sow more discord within the ranks. I think there is this impression that the Democratic Party is just kind of like all over the place and crumbling. So I think if you were to have some type of like drawn out contested situation, it would only like add fuel to that fire.
Right.
Somebody says you can't have 2 candidates from the same state. I don't know if that's like that's not like constitutionally mandated. That might have some type of like party norm or something like that. I don't think that there's any. Again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I don't think there's anything like prohibiting it, other than like maybe just you don't want to from like a optic standpoint.
So this was my sentiment. Like,
I guess somebody says it's not legal to have 2. It's a 12th Amendment. Okay, again, I'm not a legal scholar, so like.
Oh, okay. Well, but yeah, I was saying like. I agree with Double T. This was my sentiments. I was frantic yesterday, but today I feel slightly better because the donations were coming in. Like she got about at least $50 million in like 24 hours, which is impressive. And then you heard about the 40,000, I guess Black women was on a Zoom call. They raised like $1 million.
Yeah, I mean the parties are like she's gonna raise money. Like that's not a concern. I think the concern is again her viability in the general election. Like I don't have any issues that she's not gonna be able to get money from rich people. Like rich people also have a lot of money to spend right now. So given that income wealth inequality has pretty much skyrocketed since COVID. So like you have a lot of wealthy people who can afford to drop tens of millions of dollars on Kamala.
So we have a question. Is AIPAC a big donor? If so, do you think Kamala will toe the same line with the foreign policy stuff? You're not trying to get my page shut down. Hopefully we can talk about this.
Well, I mean, so I'll just be pretty general about this. I don't think Kamala is going to have a position that's any different than Joe Biden's in terms of like his commitment to Israel. And so again, Kamala's an institutionalist. Like you don't go from being the Attorney General of California to a heartbeat away from the presidency in like a decade without being an institutionalist. And what I mean by that is she's going to put the Democratic Party first. Like that is her role, or she views as one of her roles, I should say, the preservation of the party. And so like for better or worse, where you stand in your own politics. Like the Democratic Party, by and large, is an advocate of the Israeli state. So I don't see why we should expect any different from her. She's also not like leftist. So put that in the table.
So I feel like a lot of people are going to be like, oh, she's a cop. Her history in the DA and what she did makes me roll my eyes. And then the issue, with some black people is, oh, well, she's not black, because I remember that conversation too. I don't know. I'm just nervous people aren't going to vote for her because, we're still in a patriarchal society and they didn't vote for Hillary. So what would make people vote for Kamala?
Well, I mean, I don't want to say that people don't have any other reason not to vote for her besides her, racial status or her gender identification. Like, I'm not saying that that's not important to people. I'm just saying, like, we shouldn't assume that that's like the only things that people like base their vote on. But with that being said, like, we have to remember that the United States is an extremely partisan country in the sense that you don't have people who typically vote Republican switching like from election to election. Like that used to be the case somewhat maybe a few decades ago and earlier, but like people are so I wouldn't even say people are ideological because I actually don't think people have much of a political ideology. I think most people just want to be able to shop in peace and travel and not have to like think about anything aside from their own lives. And so to me, that's not political, but I think that's how most people function. I'm not blaming anybody. I just think that that's how it is. And so I think most people, if you have voted Democrat most of your life, you're probably going to continue to do that, irrespective of who's on the ticket. Same is true if you're a Republican. I think always the big kind of wild card is people who typically do not participate in the process at all. So like I always remind people that most people, or I say a plurality of people, are not either Democrats or Republicans. They just don't participate in the electoral process at all because they don't see that their lives changing significantly, irrespective of who's in office. And so I think the question is Kamala a candidate who can get people who typically do not participate in the process to participate? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, she didn't do very well when she tried to wage her own campaign in 2016 or 2020. And so like, I don't know. Like, is she the person that can do that? Nobody knows that. And so I think she'll win the typical like Democratic states. Like I don't see Trump winning like, California or New York or Illinois, states like that are like solidly Democratic. But like, can Kamala get enough of those people in the middle? Not middle from the standpoint of like, ideologically in the middle, but like on the standpoint of like typically don't get involved at all. Can she get them involved? I don't know.
Well,
she talk about actual like policies. Don't just talk about what she's not. Like, don't just be. My fear is that the campaign is just she's going to run a campaign that is essentially like vote for me because I'm not Trump. And I feel like that's the same thing that Hillary Clinton did in 2016. I feel like really that's the same thing that Joe Biden did in 2020. It's just that he got enough of the math for him, so it worked. But like, it's not like Joe Biden did significantly better than Hillary Clinton. And so because the margins are so thin, it's like it is just being the anti-Trump enough to win without offering a positive vision of your own. And I also don't think running on Biden's record is a winning strategy either. So like, what does he have anything that is unique to her to like offer to somebody that doesn't require fear mongering? And I don't know. I don't know if she does actually.
But the voters' logic where they're saying that, oh, well, nothing's going to change. My reality isn't going to change. If Trump is in office, our reality is going to change. Like, absolutely.
Wait, who is our?
The people, everybody, I feel like.
Well, I think the reason the whole like fear mongering doesn't really, for a lot of people, it seems hysterical is because we've already lived through 4 years of his presidency, which you might say is chaotic, but like, I don't think for most people, they felt like their day-to-day, I'm not saying it did or didn't. I'm saying for most people, I don't think they felt as though their day-to-day lives changed significantly over the past 8 years. And I think that the issue is that the people who control the narratives of politics are typically people who in a lot of ways are comfortable. Like they're still going to be able to like eat regardless of like who's president. But that's not, everybody can't take that for granted. Everybody can't take for granted that whether or not they're going to have a meal today. Like that's, I mean, we kind of believe that that's something you should take for granted in America, but like increasingly that's not the case. And so I'm always wondering like, well, which of the candidates is going to talk to people about not being able to afford their car insurance, or their health insurance, or what are they going to do about that, or what answers do they have for very basic things. And I think so much of our politics are always so abstract. It's just kind of like, that's what I was saying in my Wired article. It's like, it doesn't really help to be hysterical because like you can't really understand what's going on like from a systematic standpoint if you're always hysterical about things. And so I think the candidate that can most easily articulate an answer to why people feel like they are not doing that well is going to win. Now, whoever that is an open question.
We have a question. Do you think Kamala would need a white man to be her running mate in order to win?
I might have my opinion might differ on this, but I actually don't think that matters that much in the grand scheme of things. Like most of political science research argues that vice presidential picks, irrespective of the ticket or whatever, has typically been very inconsequential to the outcome, because especially now, because again, you don't have people who switch their minds based on who's on the ticket. If you're a registered Democrat and you vote, you're going to vote Democrat. If you're a registered Republican and you vote, you're probably going to vote Republican. You don't really have people kind of wavering based on the candidates. It's more so, again, like the people who don't typically participate, getting them to be involved in the process. That's usually where you only see many of the like differences that matter. So I don't think it really amounts to much, honestly.
I think she needs to pick someone. I guess the guy from Pennsylvania. I think he's the governor.
Shapiro. Why?
Because it's a swing state. I feel like it needs to be somewhere that's a swing state. Like we need to win something. And I hate that the Electoral College, which is a scam to me, like the whole election depends on the outcome of 5 states, it feels like Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. I feel like Georgia's a swing state still. I don't know. Ohio. It's just in Florida. It just feels like it's not fair.
Well, Ohio and Florida have gotten much more right wing over the last couple election cycles. I don't even think Ohio's been competitive since like the second, maybe like the first Obama election. But again, most of the research on this finds that vice presidential picks don't really make that much of a difference. Like people aren't gonna like decide to vote for that person at the top of the ticket just because they picked for their vice president. I mean, maybe that's the case, but like all of the research I learned when I was getting my PhD on this suggested that most people just don't care. Also, most people don't usually know who the vice president is unless you are like, somebody who watches CNN and MSNBC pretty frequently, which is a very small sliver of the country. I think we underestimate how many people do not follow any of this horse race at all. And I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. Like that's up to you. Like I'm not.
You think they should follow politics?
I don't think. I don't really follow the horse race that closely because to me it doesn't really. I don't say it doesn't matter, but like I think the things that more directly impact people are things that are a lot less entertaining, that are a lot less fascinating, like tax policy. Like I don't think many people follow tax policy, but to me, tax policy is like probably the thing that affects most of us most directly, and it's just never discussed. And so I'm not saying that people shouldn't follow the horse race. I'm just saying I can understand why they wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, so far she's raised $75 million. I guess what I also thought was interesting was that Obama didn't endorse her right out the gate, like other people, like Hillary and Bill, like they endorsed her. Do you think that's weird at all that Obama didn't outright endorse Kamala?
Not really, because Obama is kind of taking a very kind of behind the scenes, like I don't want to seem like I'm really have my hands in things approach since he's left office. So even like in 2020, if you remember, like he didn't really start like legit campaigning for Biden until kind of the 11th hour, like when it was people were like, oh, like we kind of need you out there because like this thing this race is super tight. So I think Obama's one of is kind of in the position of, even in 2016, like he didn't formally endorse Hillary until maybe like a month before the convention. It was super late in the process. So he's been very kind of arm's distance or arm's length kind of from the process. So I'm not really surprised by that. But I had a question. Someone asked, Sugar Shan asked, how is it going to change? Wait, what is it?
Oh, okay. Well, let us know in the chat.
What is
also,
it?
this is your time to ask questions as well. Since this is a live show, y'all can take advantage of that. We have almost 100 people in the room. Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining us. Where do you think we would be if that debate didn't happen?
I mean, you weren't going to be able to keep Biden hiding forever. So, like, at some point, I mean, even before the debate, there was, because I read the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and all these newspapers every day. So I kind of have a sense of what the political and economic elite, corporate elites are talking about. And there had been calls even before the debate to like questioning Biden's capacity for a second term. So I think it would have happened at some point. The thing that's crazy to me, which just goes to show the short-sightedness of the Democratic Party, is you knew in 2020 that Biden was going to be 82 or whatever he was at this point. So like you knew that. Like that's why you were under this impression, which I never thought was right, and nobody really knows because it's all conjecture. But like people were somehow had convinced themselves that like Joe Biden of all people is like the only singular person in the world that could like beat Trump, which I'm like, I never bought that. I still don't. But people had deluded themselves into believing that. So people had to they made their bed and then they had to lay in it. And my whole thing is like, okay, but like the whole bargain was that Biden was going to win, but you weren't going to like look to him for being the standard bearer for your party. You were going to just use him as kind of a transitional figure, as they kept saying, and mold somebody else to, whether that's Kamala or whoever, to like take his spot. Like that was the understanding. So like you had years to plan for the inevitable, which is you knew he was not going to be fit to be here in 2024. And the whole time, anytime there was any questions that arose about, you know, whether or not he could do this work, like the Democratic Party essentially gaslit people and was like, oh, what we were seeing is not actually happening. And now it just kind of blew up in their face because to me, the debate was just all of that blowing up in their face because it was going to happen regardless. You just hope it would. Well, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not in the Democratic Party, so I don't care. If you're in the Democratic Party, you just hope that it doesn't happen then, but it did. But I mean, it was going to come. It was going to happen regardless. So.
Mm-hmm. So we have some questions. Can you discuss Kamala's prosecutorial oh my goodness.
Her record as a prosecutor.
Yeah, her record as a prosecutor. Prosecutorial. I'm like, oh my God. And why some Black people are skeptical of her as a candidate and possible president.
So yeah, there is evidence from her time as Attorney General and just being, I guess, a political figure in California, in which she was quite punitive, especially with like truancy laws. So like kids that were not enrolled in school or were missing too much school, like she adopted like really punitive measures, like wanting to, you know, fine parents and all other things for like, you know, their children missing all this school. And I think the reason that people, I guess, get upset about that is because that's not really dealing with the underlying issues, which, you know, part of it, I write about the education system. And so like, we just use the education system as a punching bag to essentially punch down on people for issues that really are like a reflection of the capitalist economy. And so I think a lot of people get upset by that because they're like, oh, you're a Black woman, so you should be a little bit more understanding about the way that Black people especially suffer from kind of the underbelly of capitalism or the negative effects of it. And yet you're still espousing these really like punitive policies, you know, threatening to imprison people and stuff. And so I think that that's what people have a concern about. Now, my whole thing is like, why would you be super hard on Kamala for that, but like give Joe Biden a pass? Like Joe Biden was literally one of the most aggressively racist senators in Congress for a very long time. Like he's on camera or on film, like essentially saying he doesn't care whether or not somebody actually committed a crime. Like throw them in jail. Like that's Joe Biden. So like if you're gonna be, I never got the whole like I'm gonna come super hard on Kamala for this, but like give everybody else a pass. Like most of the people in the Democratic Party are like punitive like that. So I don't really get the zeal behind that for her.
I thought it was always so just like exaggerated sometimes.
I mean, I guess it depends who you are. Like if
Yeah.
you're the parent of a family member of someone who suffered from those laws, I'm sure you don't think it was blown out of proportion.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like no candidate's perfect, and still, like, she's running against Trump, and I think people just lose sight of that. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I mean, somebody could say, well, Trump didn't pass a policy in California that affected my family. I'm not saying I'm not endorsing anybody. I think people should do their own, work of understanding which of the parties, if any, you find appealing. All I'm saying is like, I want people to like not be so fixated on like who people are as opposed to what they do and what they have done. To me, that's more important. And I think sometimes we get so fixated on people's like who they are and not what they do when we talk about politics. So that's what I would like nudge people to. I know most people don't really care to read about like tax policy or other types of like punitive policies and things, but it's really important to do that.
What do you think about the Trump campaign shaking in their boots since the announcement of Kamala?
Shaking in their boots? Who said that?
Who said that?
They aren't. I just didn't know that was a thing. I don't. Again, Trump is not a popular candidate. People give him so much credit. Most people don't like Trump. Even in the Republican Party, most people don't like him. It's just that Trump is. He can do things that most other candidates can't do, because the reason Trump is so popular, and well, he's not that massively popular in a general standpoint, but the reason he has such a loyal following is because he makes a mockery of the electoral system. And I think a lot of people look at the electoral system as being a joke. And so I think because he treats it as a joke, and because he's entertaining, I think for a lot, and we live in a society where people don't have any degree of like historical or political consciousness, in the sense that they don't think about politics as an avenue to like positively change their lives. They think of politics as like a way to either protect themselves against other people or to inflict harm on people they don't like, which to me is a very reactionary, very nasty way of thinking about change in the world. But nonetheless, I think people have this kind of orientation about politics. I think what's happening is that because Trump adopts this very like, oh, I'm going to stick it to people. I'm going to, I don't have to play by the rules. Like I don't have to follow. I don't have to do all these things because the whole system is a joke. I think I think that resonates with people who feel as though they either are, they don't have the opportunity to have agency over their own lives or whatever. And so I think that, but there's a limit to that. I think that he has a very low ceiling, in the sense that I think that once he gets that population to support him, I don't think he has much more beyond that. And so the question is, as always, can Kamala convince enough people who are generally disenchanted with electoral politics to come out and support her because they believe she offers a emphasis on positive vision, not just being an anti something, but can do something that can meaningfully improve their lives? Can she do that? I don't know. What do you think? Do we think Kamala has a vision of the world in which enough people in enough states that matter think that she's the person that could improve their lives?
I think she does.
We'll find out. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that.
Do you think that Black men will actually vote for a Black woman president? I have been worried about that as well. Like, I just feel like straight Black men, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, so I think we should disaggregate black men because there's like 23 million black men in America, and so like all of them aren't going to vote for Kamala. All of them aren't going to vote for Trump. Some of them are going to vote for Kamala. Some are going to vote for Trump. Some won't vote at all. So like, which ones are going to do what? And so I think if you're a black man who is registered as a Democrat and typically votes Democrat, I don't think I don't think you're not going to vote for Kamala just because she's the candidate. If you are a black man who is registered as a Republican, I don't think you're going to vote for Kamala just because there's a black woman in the ticket. And so, like, I think the black men that we should be asking about are the black men who generally do not participate. As I keep saying, the people who don't bracket out all of the people who you know are going to vote because they're going to vote the way they want. I'm sure there's nothing that anybody could say to you that's going to make you vote for the other side if you already are planning to vote. So like you don't matter. Like people who already know whether or not they're going to participate in November, they don't matter. It's the people who typically don't participate in, like, I don't know if among black men, if like anything about Kamala is going to incite so much like ill will that they're going to be like, go from not participating at all to be like, I'm gonna vote for Trump. I think the better question is like, is Kamala a candidate that black men who typically don't participate in electoral politics, is she a candidate that could get them to participate, come out and vote for her? Again, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know what Kamala stands for. Like, honestly, she's just always struck me as very kind of opportunistic. And so I don't really know what her vision of the world is, to be honest.
Yeah. Just in that same breath, like someone asked, do you believe because of patriarchy and racism, people will vote for a white man over a black woman?
Again, I think it's always important to ask which people. I think we can't, like, America, there are what, 200 million registered voters in America. Of them, I don't know how many actually participate in presidential elections, maybe about 65%, give or take 60%. So like, you have to bracket out 40% of people who could vote just don't at all because they look at the parties and say, well, I'm going to be poor regardless if it's a Democrat or a Republican. So like, I would rather work 3 jobs and like focus on that as opposed to like getting pulled into the electoral row. So like that's gone. And so among the 60% of people who are partisan, i.e. either typically vote Republican or Democrat, like, is the fact that she's a black woman going to sour enough people's position or the perspective on the matter to like get them to go from voting Democrats or Republican? I don't think so. But I'm just one person. Like I don't think that sure. Like yes, we live in a patriarchal society. We live in racism is obviously a social fact of life. And so the question is like, how much does that matter? And I think a lot of that depends on a lot of different things, who the candidates are, like how people feel about their economic situation. Yeah, but again, I think the more likely thing is people are just not going to participate at all. I don't think there's going to be much movement between sides. Like, yeah.
I love how just logically you think, like more so in logic instead of emotion.
Because like, if you want like a hysterical take, you could just turn on CNN or go to MSNBC. I feel like my value is to like try to get people to think about things that maybe they haven't thought about because it's not covered in the news, because the news have no kind of incentive to talk about these things in this way because that's not interesting. Like people want a soundbite, they want something that's going to get them riled up, like because that's what gets clicks. And so I'm not a rah-rah. I'm not gonna rile you up because like that's just not really what I
do. Thank you, Garden Rose, for the super chat. What kind of president do you think Kamala would be? Do you think world leaders will respect her? What about personality? We know sis sounds drunk.
So if you take the Wall Street Journal at face value, because they're always running editorials about the Wall Street Journal hates Kamala, by the way, which it's again, I'm not like invested in electoral politics in this way, and so like I just like to read kind of all of the different sides. And foreign policy, it kind of doesn't matter I don't say it doesn't matter, but like there's a large degree of kind of consistency between the parties whoever is in office. And the reason that is because like the American bureaucracy is just so vast and so uh, complex now to where it kind of can operate on its own, like even without like irrespective of who's president. Like the State Department is kind of its own thing now. Same with the Defense Department. So like the military industrial complex, they kind of pretty much do whatever they want. They are usually writing a lot of the, especially for the bills that give more funding to like the Defense Department and for weapons and stuff. They're pretty much writing the legislation in tandem with like lobbying groups. So I don't think whoever is the president is going to really change much of that. I don't really know. Again, she doesn't really have much of an ideology to me in terms of like what her vision of the world is. And so I feel like she's going to say whatever sounds good and whatever her speechwriters tell her to say. Like, I don't get the impression that.
Not you calling her a puppet.
I mean, the president is we think of the president as being like Superman, but they really at this point are really just a figurehead for the State Department, Wall Street, and the Defense Department. Like Wall Street pretty much writes most of the tax policy at this point, because the way that our elections work is if you donate to a candidate, you're not just donating to them because you like them and want to see them win. No, you're donating to them because you expect them to support and advocate for policies that would benefit you if they make it into office. And so if Kamala gets money from Wall Street, which I'm sure she will, if she gets money from private equity, which I'm sure she will, she's going to be expected to support the policies that are going to benefit her wealthy donors. Like somebody said once, America has the best election system that money can buy. And I'm like, it really is true. Like the reason that politicians typically don't listen to what working people have to say is because y'all don't donate millions of dollars to their campaigns. And so I say all that to say, I think Kamala, like most political figures, is going to support the policies and take the positions that the very wealthy people who control and donate to her campaigns tell her to support and donate. Because if she doesn't, they'll just support somebody else. So
right. And speaking of that, I was having that conversation with friends, like, because like a lot of people think that, okay, so Joe Biden isn't running anymore, so now he can just really go wild in the White House. But you said you can't really see that happening.
I mean, he could try to do different things, but like, I think people need to understand, like, these people are institutionalists. And again, they believe Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, they believe that the system works. Like, they don't think that there's anything fundamentally wrong with American capitalism, with Congress or the courts or the legal system. They don't think anything is fundamentally wrong with it. What they think is that, what really we just need is a few reforms kind of at the margins, kind of, tinker with this here and there. But the basic foundation of the system, they think is absolutely fine. And as I've talked in this show, like hopefully people who watch Poli Sci, I should know, like I fundamentally disagree with that. And so ultimately, like Joe Biden, like they're institutionalists, like they're going to do the thing. Why would Joe Biden like try to throw a wrench in the system if he thinks the system works? Like, that's just not really what he does. And also, like, he understands that once you leave office, it's not just about you. He has a whole family to take care of. He has generational wealth that I'm sure he wants to bequeath to people. And so he's going to leave on friendly terms. Like, he might talk a big game, but he's not going to like do anything because he's an institutionalist. And as much as Trump tries to pretend that he's not an institutionalist, he is in a lot of respects. Like, that's why when he first became president in 2017, the first thing he did was went to the Heritage Foundation and essentially said, okay, can you give me the blueprint for the tax bill so I can pass all these tax cuts for rich people? And that's really the only major domestic platform he had. And so I think somebody in the comments said that, getting all of this money out of politics would make a huge difference. I agree, but I also think we should understand like the bureaucracy, and not from a conspiratorial way, but like a lot of people don't want to get the money out of politics because the money pays people. So like you have a whole campaign industry that's built up around not only elections, but lobbying is like a whole you can get very lucrative jobs at lobbying firms or working in one of these non-governmental organizations. And so like to me, the question is like, how do we turn politics into something that becomes like a career for people as opposed to like a vehicle for changing people's lives for the better? Or rather, can politics be a vehicle for changing people's lives for the better? Or is politics really just an outlet for people to find protection from people they don't feel comfortable around? Like, what is politics?
I think you gave me that aha moment when we were talking about like lobbyists. And I was just like, why can't Kamala or Joe Biden just be like, yeah, I'll take this money and then do something completely different and be like, really do some change. And you'd be like, okay, well, they would be like, bet. So next time when you're running, I'm going to take all this money from you. So
yeah, I mean, look what they did to Jamal Bowman in New York. So he came out in support of the Palestinians, and what happened? All of the donors quickly funneled their money to the other candidate who was pro-Israel, and he lost by almost 20 points. Like that's what happens. Like either they'll find somebody out there to run against you. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene is like a good example of this. Like her campaign got bankrolled, so she is essentially produced by far right think tanks who said, "Hey, girl, we'll slide you a little money under the table. You go out here, say all kind of crazy stuff, distract people while we pass these big tax cuts." So they have people. Kristen Sinema was the same way. Like, but that's not exceptional. We have the best electoral system money can buy. So like, if people want to have careers, you got to learn how to like hit your huh.
I feel like you have to just play the game, and people don't really understand that until they get into that position or they just understand it.
Yeah, I mean, and so like it doesn't have to be that way. Like we just accepted it has to be this way, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah, somebody asked me also if I'm an independent. So I just want to answer that. So I like to think of myself as intellectually independent. So I try not to be partisan about anything. I try to think as logically and thoroughly as I can about whatever issue it is and try to arrive in my own position about it. So I try to read widely. So I read lots of conservative books. I read left communist books. I read liberals. I read everything and get a sense of how they approach different questions, and getting different perspectives allows me to like kind of see where I stand in relation not only to them, but like for myself. And so I can like develop my own opinions about things. But I never want to just parrot what somebody else tells me. So like, and that includes me. So like, don't be out here like parroting what I'm saying. Like I'm just one person's perspective. Like I'm not the authority in this. Like there are other people who feel very differently than I do. Hopefully I can just give people like, perspective that's not partisan, or one that's not, steadfast in one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe the Electoral College violates the one person, one vote rule?
Yes. I mean, no further elaboration. Absolutely.
Also, do you think Biden or team will come out and announce medical reasons for dropping out? Some say he has early onset dementia, but it's hard to believe things these days.
At this point, I don't really know if there's really any value in him saying something about this now. I mean, it's done. Like he's out. So I actually think he'll probably be pretty low key from now until the election, because I think he did feel as though, or rather the Democratic Party felt as though he was becoming a liability. And so I don't think he's going to say much. Now, after the election, he might be a little bit more forthcoming about, the exact reasons why he stepped down. But to me, it's kind of water under the bridge now.
My question is, do you think it's hypocritical for Nancy Pelosi to tell him to step down when she's like, what? Isn't she in her 90s and she's still running?
84. She's 84, but I guess
84?
84. But I guess in the Pelosi, she can also be like, I'm also not president. So
let's see. If the populace were educated in civics, we could frustrate lobbyists. But alas, we have been told it's too complicated, like the Bible.
No, I agree with this wholeheartedly. I actually don't think politics is that complicated. So like when I teach my intro to political philosophy class, one thing I try to stress to my students is that politics is really only amounts to a question of who gets what, when, and how. Like that's the upshot of politics. Um, what's being produced, who gets it, who doesn't get it, and who gets to determine who gets it. Like that's really all. We've just turned politics into this super complicated. You need to know all of the rules of Congress and all these agencies, and same with like finance. Like you look at the stock market and it's just your eyes glaze over because it's just all these numbers and it doesn't make any sense. But all of that's intentional. Like so in the early 20th century, there was a early mid 20th century, there was really a concern that America was becoming too democratic. This is especially so after like the 60s with the civil rights movement and the women's rights movements and stuff. There was a lot of concern that America was becoming too democratic in the sense that people weren't letting the experts and the smart people run things, and they weren't accepting what the very smart people in the rooms were doing. And so, like, part of what political leaders did in response to that is take a lot of the function of politics outside of the realm of democracy. So, like, organizations that you've probably heard and don't really know much about them, I argue oftentimes have some of the most powerful, or some of the most powerful institutions in the world, like the Federal Reserve, completely undemocratic. They play a bigger role in shaping the economy, which affects every single person than probably any other institution in the United States, and nobody even knows hardly anything about what they do. The Federal Reserve, you have the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, like all of these groups that have such a huge impact on politics. The reason they exist is because political elites on both sides of the aisle, liberals and conservatives, thought people were essentially getting too big for their britches and they needed to sit down and shut up. And so part of the reason people don't learn civics anymore, I don't know about y'all, but I only had one semester of civics in high school. And it was not, and we didn't learn anything. It was pretty much all rote memorization, just regurgitating shit from worksheets and stuff. Like there's no context, there's no indication of like why we have a system of private property. None of this is brought up. If people knew these things, I think we would have a much different world. But like there's a reason the humanities and the social sciences are being defunded, because knowledge in a lot of respects is power. So that's why we do poli sci.
Do you believe in like the whole Project 2025 thing? People are just warning everyone about that's going to be implicated if Trump is president.
So I think Project 2025, I think, needs to be contextualized. So it's produced by the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is a pretty conservative think tank that's existed, I think, since like the Reagan administration or maybe shortly before. And they've been releasing manifestos like this for the last like 40 years. Like I'm not saying it's a terrible document. Like the document is essentially trying to, really what the document is trying to do is fortify capitalism, because they understand that capitalism has a lot of real issues. And one really big problem with capitalism right now is labor. Like people, this isn't just people on the right, but especially people on the right, feel like people are making too much money. People don't want to work as much. They're concerned that people are not having enough kids to reproduce the labor force. They also want older people to work longer, which is why they're pushing to privatize Social Security and cut back benefits. But this has been something that's been ongoing for a while. So like Project 2025 is just another iteration of their plan to essentially make it so that people can't imagine another way of organizing life aside from selling your labor for a wage, which is really an anti-socialist project, but that's been true again for a while. And so I think people are really hysterical about Project 2025, but it's really not new. And it's really unfortunate the way that the news discusses it, because if you discuss it in a detailed way, you can see that it's a part of a broader project that's also not just true happening in the United States, but also in lots of parts of Western Europe too. So really unfortunate that people don't talk about it in a coherent way.
Yeah. I think you would like this question, because I know you love saying this. Like, would you say that Democrats and Republicans are different sides of the same coin?
Uh, uh, yes and no. So like I think so the thing with the Democratic Party, so there's a really good book about I think will give a good kind of history of the Democratic Party. And people will be like, why are you so hard on the Democrats, but you don't come, for Republicans it's hard. And my whole thing is like the Republican Party has pretty much been the same since the mid 20th century, which is that they're a party of, I mean, both parties are parties of capitalism. They're parties of the wealthy. Like that's their main donor base. The parties respond to the people who donate to their campaigns. Both parties get money from private equity. Both parties get tech money from the tech industry. Both parties get money from pharmaceuticals. Oil companies tend to donate more to Republicans, but not exclusively. And so, like, in a lot of respects, they agree on most things. They agree on American. They agree. They believe in American exceptionalism. So they think that America is the best country in the world, and it's our right to control the world. Like Democrats and Republicans both believe that. They both believe that there is no way to organize life aside from capitalism. They both agree on that. They both agree that that democracy should be limited to just voting. So like they don't really care to open questions of like money and global affairs to any type of democratic discussion. Like that has to be done by the smart people in the room. So in that respect, I think they're very similar. I think where they differ is that they have different visions of what a legitimate capitalist democracy should look like. For Democrats, they're like, yeah, we understand that people are going to be poor, that we're going to have to throw people in jail, that we're going to have to, that some people are going to get great jobs, some people are going to have shitty jobs. And like, that's just the way it is because that's nature. Like capitalism is, that's just the way it is. But to be fair, we should just make sure it's evenly distributed. So just make sure that there's no disparities between the number of Black and white people in jail, or we should make sure that anybody, Black or white or a woman or whatever, can be president. So just make sure demographically all the bad stuff and the good stuff are evenly distributed. Whereas the Republican Party is essentially like much more open about America is a white country and like white people should get, specifically white men should get most of the good stuff and be in the positions of power. So like as long as that's in place, like everything else doesn't really matter. But like, so that's really where they differ the most is in terms of the distribution of the good and bad things. But like they accept that the good and bad things are they have no control over dictating that. Like all they can do is like make sure that Democrats can just make sure that the seats at the table are different colors and genders.
Now, I know you you always bring up, how capitalism really is ruining society. And, our next episode was supposed to be talking about, common misconceptions about socialism, which we'll get to that in a later episode. But I'm just wondering, is socialism the answer? Lord, I hope I don't get demonetized. But I'm just wondering, like, can that be the answer? Because like if capitalism is bad, then what else is there? I'm sure people are wondering.
Yeah, so I don't think you should think of capitalism as bad. What I would say is you should think of capitalism as a historical system that in a lot of respects has run its course. So like the reason I'm advocating for socialism isn't, I'm done with just bashing capitalism for the sake of it. Like that's boring to me now. What I'm trying to explain to people is that economic systems are historical. It's just like at some point they can't do the things that they claim they used to be able to do because of a host of reasons. And so like the basic idea of capitalism was that essentially through the accumulation of wealth, you could distribute, you can improve people's living standards, and you would have less kind of competition for things because we could produce at scale and people could have the things that they needed. Now in the United States, like living standards have risen pretty significantly since, let's say, the 17th century. That's not to say that getting there has been to get there, you had to have indentured servitude, racialized chattel slavery. You had to have mass extermination of indigenous populations. You had to have wars. You had to have all kind of other devastating effects to get to where we are now. But you can't turn back the dial on that. Like it's done. Like we can sit and talk about like, who is owed this or that. But like to me, I would much rather focus on like how can we improve the vast majority of people's lives moving forward. And I think the way that you do that is through socialism. And by what I mean by socialism is just that every decision we make can't be oriented around building wealth. Like that can't be the only question. That can be one question, and it should be one question, but that can't be the only one. And as long as we have a society in which that's the only animated question is like how much wealth can that generate for somebody, like we're gonna keep running into this destructive kind of we're gonna keep running into the wall because capitalism is in a lot of respects to continue producing wealth, you're going to have to destroy more of the rainforest, which has all kinds of consequences for climate change. You're going to have to eat away at like more coastal erosion from oil drilling and things like that. And so from an ecological or like a climate standpoint, we have to be more oriented towards, okay, what do we need as opposed to just like producing stuff just for the sake of producing it. And that's why I'm advocating for socialism, not because I'm just like, we just need to, start from scratch or anything like that, but like, we just need to start asking different questions. And to me, socialism is just about asking questions about what can we do to produce the things that people need, as opposed to just producing the things that don't make people money.
Well said. So we're going to, I guess, cap off the questions. If you have any other questions, please put it in the comments. And also make sure you like the video, please. I'm hoping I get that little green sign at the end of this video. Thank you, YouTube.
So I just saw Marissa's comment, and I agree wholeheartedly. So even I think it's important we don't understand social. Part of the reason I wanted to do the poli-sci episode is because I wanted to like disabuse people of all of the propaganda that they've been fed about socialism for really since like for the last century plus. I actually have a forthcoming paper in which I try to articulate how socialism, even among people who weren't like radical, like people thought that socialism was kind of the next logical step, because at some point, like people were like, okay, we can't keep producing shit that people don't. Think about all the things you go into the store, you see in the shelves, and you're like, okay, did we really need that? Like, why did I need this thing to like scratch my back? Like, why couldn't I just like, I don't know, lift my arm and do it myself? Like, capitalism is producing a lot of shit we don't need, because the things that we don't need are the things that make money for people. So like the things that we actually need aren't produced, which is why they're so expensive. And so we actually like oriented our society around like, okay, like let's make sure that first and foremost, all the things that people need are produced and can get to them. Then we can have whatever's left over to do. If we want to do hood rat shit with our friends or whatever, like fine. But like capitalism just cannot answer the question of like producing for things that people need anymore. Like, and it's not because people are just greedy. It's not because people are mean. It's not just because people hate Black people or women. All of those things might be true, but like even if those things weren't true, capitalism still wouldn't be able to answer the questions.
Gotcha. So I guess while we were doing the video, a lot of people were saying that Pelosi just endorsed Kamala. I'm guessing that's a big thing. I guess last question is like, what do you see happening in the next 3 months?
Okay, that's a good question. So before I answer that, I just want to respond to Miss Lucky Lefty. That's an important question. The question is, that's where politics comes in. So to be politics, as I said earlier, like the question of who gets what, when, and how. And so if you, not to get super philosophical about this, but if you go read like Tocqueville from the 19th century, one thing he says is that, none of these questions are set in stone and they're not a question of nature. Like, that's why people have to do politics. You have to talk to people and like understand what their visions of the world is, what they believe that is necessary for them to live a good life. That's always been like, even going back to like old Athenian societies, the question of like what is required to live a good life has always been inherently political. So what we need is to like be able to talk about these things. Like essentially, if we could have these discussions, right, like this on like a daily basis and on a mass scale, I think that we would be on a good footing. But the question is like, where can you have these conversations? And I don't know. Do people even want to have these conversations? That's another question. I think I'm hopeful. So I think people do want to have these conversations. conversations. I think people do want to understand, what is needed, and like understand, have these kind of exchanges with people, but like we just don't have the environment to do that in a lot of respects. And so I'm always trying to like find a place to do that. Okay, so I just wanted to answer that. And so your question is, what do I think is going to happen in the next 3 months? I think it'll be pretty routine. I think the election campaign season kind of dies down after the conventions. So the Democratic convention is, well, I think the third week of August, and so usually I have a dead period as people are going back to school, like going back. Summer is kind of winding down, so people are kind of getting back into the routines. And then like early October, I think that's around the time you have the first round of presidential debates. That's when you start to see things really ramp up, like that last like 4 to 6 week window. I don't have any reason to believe that that'll change unless there's something else that drastic that happens. Which, I mean, at this point, can you ever really know? Like, all kind of shit keeps happening that none of us had in our bingo card a month ago. So like, So
this has definitely been like, like Black Mirror or American Horror Story election again. I feel like there's going to be an October surprise, something. I guess my two questions are just right quick. Like, who do you think the running mate's going to be? And, oh my God, what was the other question I have for you? Well, who do you think who do you think she's going to choose as her running mate?
It'll probably be somebody in like, probably not somebody that you're not thinking about, somebody in Congress or somebody that's not super hot, super well known, because again, I think you're gonna have a hard time getting somebody to jump on this ticket this late. And so you're probably it's either going to be somebody that's currently in Congress that is probably not on people's radar, or it's going to be somebody that's a super institutionalist who's kind of been around and is familiar with campaigns of this magnitude, who can just kind of jump in without needing to be coached or like brought up to speed. So I'm thinking of somebody like, I don't know, like a previous Democratic. I saw somebody throw out like North Carolina's governor, Roy Cooper, which somebody like that would make sense. Like, you're a Democratic governor of a swing state who is term limited, so he can't run for re-election anyway, so he doesn't really have anything to lose. Like, if you lose the ticket, so be it. You're about to leave the office anyway. So probably somebody like that, somebody that doesn't really have much to lose, but not new to the game, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I'm pretty sure we'll be, keeping tabs on this as it goes on. I would like no more surprises right now. Like, I just want Kamala to just really just ease into it. I really don't think there's going to be another debate. I think that was my question I was about to ask you. Like, I really don't think they're going to have another debate.
You definitely have more debate. You have like the fall debates, like those are pretty. They set those like way in advance.
Trump isn't going to agree to a debate with Kamala Harris. I just don't see that happening.
I think he would. Well, people forget Trump likes being in that. He thrives in those. He loves the camera. So like, I would be. I mean, I don't know for sure. Like, I'm not an insider, so I don't know. But like, especially because I actually think Trump would have been less inclined to do the debate if Biden would have stayed in the race, because at that point you really didn't have anything to gain from debating Biden. You'd already beaten him once. So like, at that point, Trump was probably going to just be let's just kind of lay low and kind of run the clock out in this thing. But I think with Kamala running, I think she's going to be much more aggressive, much more kind of pushy about that. And so I think his campaign strategists are going to probably not force him, but like convince him to, because you don't want somebody just like hurling all this shit at you and you don't have a chance to like, push back. So I think because he is such a, I mean, Trump is a stunt queen too. So like, he loves the camera. So like, there's never a spotlight that Trump has shied away from. So I would be shocked, but I could be wrong about that.
It's crazy how Trump is seen to have won that debate, which is crazy to me, but America.
Well, I think it was less about him winning the debate in as much as it was Biden just losing it. Like, Trump wasn't impressive either. Like, he wasn't saying nothing about nothing, to be honest.
Right.
But Biden was just such an abject failure. Like, all he had to do was like not be terrible, and he could have won.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Thank you, Jared, for being on here for an hour. I know this is a new format for us doing completely live. I think this was a smooth live. I think we can start doing episodes like that.
Yeah, thanks so much for your questions, y'all. I love the engagement. I think I tried to answer as many questions as I could, but if I missed anything, feel free to find me on Twitter or Facebook. I mean Facebook, not Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. Don't find me on Facebook. I only check Facebook once, like every 3 months. But Twitter or Instagram, you can feel free to shoot me a message, and I'll be glad to. Or you want to leave a comment, I can also respond there.
And I feel like we had like a steady classroom of over 100 people in the chat.
Oh, wow, okay. I didn't know that.
You can't see the numbers, but I can.
Oh, wow. 100 people that listen to me be a jabber.
Yeah, like we had a steady like 115 in the room. So yeah, we appreciate y'all for like taking a break from my pop culture, Basketball Wives, which will be coming up, Basketball Wives, as well as Real Housewives of New Jersey. I'm sure, Jared, can you name anyone from Basketball Wives? Just one person.
Is Jocelyn Hernandez on that?
That is Love and Hip Hop.
Oh,
that is Love and Hip Hop.
Are they on the same channel? Aren't they both on VH1?
It's on the same channel as Basketball Wives.
I was in the ballpark then. No, I can't then.
Can you name one housewife of New Jersey? Crazy, right? Y'all. Teresa Giudice. I'm not sure if you heard of her.
Who?
The one that flipped over the table, prostitution whore.
Is she the one that was like, name them? Name them.
No, that's Sutton from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I tried. Anyway, if you want to follow Jared, it's JC Tiger Fan, JayTigerFan.
You missed the C, JayC.
Oh, I did miss that. Yeah. All right. It's down below in the description as well. See, she went to jail. She did go to jail.
Wait, the namer woman went to jail?
No. Teresa Giudice from Jersey.
Oh, what's the her woman name again?
Sutton.
Oh, I love that meme.
Sutton Strack.
Okay, she's like, name them. You
should watch it. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I guess look out for our next episode. Hopefully we can do this, to talk about socialism. I cannot wait to see if this was monetized or not.
Yeah, y'all please come if Chris doesn't get you on, please come for that episode because I'm very much looking forward to it.
And with that, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see y'all for the next episode.